Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבת אחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבת אחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבת אחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. It's a special privilege to welcome Sarah Hurwitz to the show. Sarah is one of the most thoughtful Jewish voices of our time. Many know her from her years as a White House speechwriter, first as senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then as head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. She was also the chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. But it was her own journey into Judaism, chronicled first in her best-selling book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there. It's a long title, but it's all true. That has made her such a powerful guide for so many seeking meaning, depth, and connection in Jewish life today. Her brand new book, hot off the presses, As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Blame, Shame, and Try to Erase Us, is not simply memoir or reflection. It is a polemic. At a moment when so much of our energy is directed outward, toward fighting and canceling anti-Semitism, Sarah turns the question inward, confronting how anti-Semitism has shaped Jewish identity in both visible and hidden ways, and urging us to reclaim the fullness of our tradition. It feels especially fitting to have this conversation as we begin Rosh HaShanah, which is not only the Jewish New Year, but a day when we step back and reflect on our deepest identity. Who are we? What do we stand for? And how will we write the next chapter of our lives? It's a time to hear the shofar and be reminded of our covenant, our brit with God, of our responsibilities to one another, and of the larger story we are each called to enter. In the language of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, it is the season of removing the klipot, the shells or blockages that conceal the divine light in our souls, so that we may return to our truest, purest selves. Sarah's work in many ways is about that very act of spiritual uncovering, stripping away the false identities imposed by history and the world around us, and inviting us to rediscover and reclaim who we are as a people and what it means to live today, in her words, as a Jew. In the next hour, God willing, we will discover together why so many are already calling As a Jew the book of the new year, and why Yossi Klein Halevi has written that As a Jew is that rare book that defines a historical moment. The American Jewish awakening is upon us, and Sarah Hurwitz is its prophet. Sarah, welcome. Such a treat. We met 10 years ago, I think, almost.
We did.
Dana Stern and Dana Dibber introduced us, and it's our first time meeting in person. I'm really excited.
So great to be here. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm not a prophet. Yossi was way too kind, but I love him very much.
Listen, in the sense, I mean, we're all prophets in different ways, and certainly in the sense of a call to action and, you know, shifting the lens that people have. You know, if those are core elements of a prophet, it feels like you're definitely doing that with this book, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, so let's. I mean, I could talk to you for 12 hours. We could just talk about your time in the White House, you know. But I want to jump into what this book is about and how we got here. People refer to your first book as the love letter and the second as the polemic.
Yes.
Tell us the journey, how you get from the love letter to the polemic.
Yeah, so I grew up like many American Jews, where Judaism for me was 3 boring holidays and 1 fun one, Hanukkah. 2 texts, the prayer book I held in my hand and the Torah on the scrolls at the front of the synagogue, and a few universalist values, don't lie, cheat, steal, help the poor, etc. And, I had a pretty apologetic Jewish identity for most of my life. It was like, I'm Jewish, but I'm not that Jewish. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm just a cultural Jew. Which, by the way, if you connect to Jewish tradition through Jewish culture, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Jewish thought, history, languages, literature, arts, that's gorgeous. I knew none of that. Didn't even know that all existed. Or, I'm a social justice Jew. Social justice is my Judaism. Again, that's such a beautiful way to connect to Jewish tradition if you know what Jewish tradition says about social justice. Mm-hmm. Again, I did not. So what did I mean? I meant I have a gallows sense of humor. Ha, I'm kind of anxious. I like Seinfeld and bagels, which is a pretty contentless Jewish identity. Or, I remember the Holocaust. I'm proud we survived persecution. what a stupid Jewish identity. We were persecuted? That's your Judaism? Like, how disrespectful to 4,000 years of wisdom about what it means to be human. But again, if your only points of contact with Judaism are, again, 4 holidays, 2 texts, 3 universal values, why would you know about that 4,000 years of wisdom? You never see it. So, when in my mid-30s, I randomly wound up taking an Intro to Judaism class, long story as to why, and I was just blown away by what I found. Like, I discovered those 4,000 years of brilliant, countercultural, transformational wisdom about what it means to be human, and I could not believe it. I was like, where has this been all my life? And I wanted to tell everyone about it. So my first book was this love letter to Jewish tradition. It was sharing what I had found with other Jews. And that was lovely, all warm and fuzzy and good, And then, it's funny, during COVID, I trained to be a hospital chaplain. I want to pause on the word chaplain. When I say that, people are like, are you still Jewish? I mean, you're still Jewish. It's like, it's a Christian word, right?
Sure.
And, I was asked in my application about my ministry and my theology. And, I was told in my training that prayer was like, God, please heal so-and-so who's right here next to me, who can hear me praying out loud, spontaneously and extemporaneously for them. Beautiful way to pray. Please, if you wish to pray that way, go ahead. But I wouldn't say that's a common form of Jewish prayer. But I was told, no, everyone prays that way. And I'm like, actually, Christians, And I began to realize how much the way I thought about Judaism was a result of how I was soaked in Christianity. Even the idea of spirituality. I was like, our bodies are degraded, carnal, kind of bad, and there's this spirit realm that is good. And the idea is to transcend this bad, degraded body for that spirit realm. Read the Torah. It's all about how we treat our bodies. Our bodies are not bad or degraded. They are actually sacred and holy. That body-soul duality is not central to Judaism. But I bet you if you polled the vast majority of Jews, they'd be like, that's spirituality. So that was one thing that inspired my next book. Another thing was that I visited a college campus about a year before October 7th, so many months before this really got some attention. And the students there, one of them said to me at the Hillel, great Jewish students, one said, so how did you deal with anti-Semitism when you were in college? And I was like, what? I didn't ever, not once. And the kids didn't believe me. Like, they just couldn't fathom it. And I was like, wait, I'm sorry. Is that what's happening here? And they started telling me stories of what was happening on campus. And I thought, like, oh boy, what's going on here? And I was, this was in the kind of post-2021 Gaza war where just a lot of really ugly rhetoric was coming out. So that really worried me. And I started to just kind of begin to question my Jewish identity, my very apologetic Jewish identity. Why was I always going around kind of trying to convince people I wasn't too Jewish? Why was the Judaism I'd grown up with so oddly edited? Like, why had I never seen the 4,000 years of wisdom that I discovered in my mid-30s in my childhood Judaism? Like, what had happened? And so my book was me taking a deep dive into history to begin to understand how thoroughly infiltrated and warped my Jewish identity had been by 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, and by 200 years of Jews in what was actually a really courageous and well-intentioned effort to escape that persecution and to take advantage of the opportunities of the modern world. It was those Jews erasing themselves, like erasing some of their traditions in order to be safe, right? And I don't blame my ancestors for that, right? Like, they were trying to live, right? They were trying to have the opportunities that I take for granted, but there is a cost. And I think today we are really reckoning with the cost of our transition to modernity and everything we left behind. So this book is how I discern those layers of shame, self-hatred, internalized anti-Semitism, began to think about stripping them away and really turning to Jewish tradition with curiosity, open-heartedness, and a Jewish lens as opposed to either an anti-Semitic lens or a Christian lens.
Beautiful. Okay, I want to pull out, I think I heard you say 3 things that are all relevant to the book. One was noticing in your chaplaincy where you're kind of just showing up to do good, let's call it rabbinic Jewish work, and noticing kind of like the Christian water around you. Right. And then the second one was, head-on anti-Semitism on college campuses where it's like clear that someone's coming out to get you. And the third is the sense of kind of looking back and noticing the way the Jewish people have evolved and the way it's been in conversation with what's been going on around it. And this key point, as you say in the book as well, that you're not angry at your ancestors for evolving. You're aware of what they were going through. So just, I want to sit with, and those are each big topics, but let's sit for a second. So I want to actually share with you, as I was reading the book, I was also having I was doing my therapy, right? And realizing, because I think part of the book you go through, you're like, wait a second, like you step out for a second. And it's like, okay, how have outside forces influenced me, and how have outside forces that don't have my best interests influenced me? And I think, you mentioned how college campuses were a serene place. I will say that for me, I have two memories that stand out. I also, I was not that much later than you. I was Penn 05 and Harvard Law School 09. When were you Harvard?
So I was Harvard 99 and Harvard Law School 04. So
Fine,
you know.
And so maybe 5 years, 6 years behind. So I would say, I spoke at my graduation at Penn. I was the commencement speaker in my class. I wrote a speech back in the day. I always wanted to speak.
All right,
there you
look
go.
at you.
Look at me. And I remember they asked me to say like my bio. And so I got into Harvard Law School and I took a year off to go to Pardes for the year. And so I wrote in the bio to give to them, first of all, it was like, we'll talk about being a cool Jew. I think for me, being introduced as the president of Hillel before I gave the speech felt like a very I'm a proud Jew.
Yeah.
Imagine a president of Hillel giving the commencement speech today. Impossible to imagine. But anyway,
it's very hard to imagine.
But in my bio was, he'll be spending the next year exploring his Jewish heritage in Israel, followed by his time in Harvard Law School. And the person who introduced me skipped over that. Right? I graduated spring of 2005, and all they said was, in the fall of 2006, he'll be entering Harvard Law School. And that was how it was recited. So it bummed me out at the time, but it was like something was missing there, and it made me reflect on that a lot when I read this. And the second one was also commencement. When I graduated from Harvard, someone came up to me the last day of school, and you'll love this, and said to me, "Justin, you're the coolest Orthodox Jew I've ever met." Right? And so
Thanks.
so exactly, right? So at the time, I remember actually, to me, it felt like nailed it, right?
Right.
I want to be this person who's I want to show people that I'm that you can be Orthodox and successful in the secular world and play basketball and volleyball and be fun at the parties and those kinds of things. And I want to prove to them that it's cool to be an Orthodox Jew and not this thing that you have an image of. But it makes me realize that I was trying. Yeah. Right? I must have been trying in some ways, and the fact that felt good when someone said it, instead of me being like, wait, what's she really saying?
Right. It's like, what if I were just a really passionate Orthodox Jew? Do I have to do these other things to be okay?
Right.
It's like, do I have to be, this was the transition to modernity, right? It was this idea, in Western Europe, where these, Jews had always lived in these insular Jewish communities where we were just Jews. Mm-hmm. You weren't a Frenchman of the Jewish religion, you were a Jew, 24/7, living by Jewish law, eating Jewish food. Suddenly, when you can become a citizen of your country, you got to figure out how to be a Frenchman of the Jewish Mosaic persuasion, of the Jewish persuasion. And that is kind of that moment of being where, Jews back then made this decision to be like, oh, we're just like you, we just go to a different church. Our Jew church, right? Look at, and it even looks like your church. Yeah. Actually, we have stained glass.
We'll change it to look like you.
We'll change it to look like your church. All of those post-biblical texts, I had no idea that after the Torah, there was more. Mm-hmm. I was like, I thought Judaism just began and ended with the Torah because that's all I saw. No, there were 2,500 years of commentary, debates, questioning, arguments, and wisdom about what it means to be human. But back then, in the 1800s in Western Europe, we were like, oh, no. The Christians, they don't really like that, so we'll just kind of put that aside. And in a way, there was kind of the jamming the Protestant cookie cutter into Jewish tradition and getting rid of what didn't fit. Mm-hmm. And Orthodoxy, by the way, was a reaction to that. Mm-hmm. Orthodoxy is also a modern invention. So when people kind of say well, Orthodoxy didn't do that, I'm like, Orthodoxy came after the Reformers. Sure. So, but it was that impulse. I'm just like you. Yeah. We go to a different. But what if I wasn't just like you? That's not cool. What was that okay? Yeah. And by the way, other minority groups. I was talking to a friend about this, and he was like, "Oh, my people too have dealt with this. It's like, oh, we have to be just like you to be accepted." Mm-hmm. So
beautiful. All right. So I want to zoom. You alluded to some of that, but I just want to zoom out for a second there, right? So first of all, I want to name what you said, which is subtle, but people miss it. And the language you use in the book is, there's Torah and the Torah.
Yes.
And I think a lot of Jews really only know about the Torah, and
Correct.
You could argue that part of that has to do with trying to fit in with Christianity, the Torah being the 5 books of Moses.
Right.
There's also Tanakh, there are other books of the Jewish canon, and there's all of rabbinic literature, and this
Correct.
idea of inviting people in to know, to engage with that, which I know you've done and you laid out beautifully in your first book. The second thing I want to do is take a moment and just, you do it over 3 painstakingly, beautifully written, very, very well researched chapters, and I'm going to ask you to do it in 7 minutes.
Sure.
But basically, you lay out, I think you call it, what do you call it? The greatest mystery that's not a mystery, or something like that?
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
So you kind of lay out the birth of anti-Semitism in early Christianity, and then you trace anti-Semitism in at least Western European anti-Semitism, and then you also have a chapter on American anti-Semitism. Yeah. So, we're not going to do the whole hour.
On one foot.
And we discussed, I think actually, especially this time of year, part of our problem is dwelling so deeply in anti-Semitism and not focusing on the Torah. So we're going to model the importance of recognizing the history and effects of anti-Semitism without spending all of our time dwelling in that, because then we've lost the same battle. So,
thank you for that. But I will do the summary. On one foot, very quickly.
Yeah.
So there was certainly anti-Semitism before Christianity, but I think I, like a lot of American young people, I learned about anti-Semitism through Holocaust education. Mm-hmm. And so the way that story goes is the Germans lost World War I, blamed the Jews. The Depression happened, they blamed the Jews, and then they killed them. And you're like, okay, why? Because of prejudice and scapegoating. And you're like, oh, okay. They're like, wait, but why the Jews? They're like, because of prejudice and scapegoating. It's like, no, I get that, but why the prejudice and scapegoating? It's like, oh, okay, interesting. And the reason I think the actual answer is because of 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism, which paved the way for the kind of thinking that led to the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. That is the answer to the question, why the Jews? And that's not my idea. That is the work of a huge number of very brilliant Christian scholars who I quote heavily in my book. I really defer to them because they know their traditions, and they've really done pretty heroic work in digging deep into this and really uncovering this stuff. Try teaching that in an American public school. Yeah. We live in a country where saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas causes a war. So it's like.
And by the way, I'm literally going, I think, next month to a public school in New Jersey to speak it, because my grandfather was saved by Oscar Schindler, and one of the teachers there heard me speak, and I literally have the task you're describing right now, which is I'm being given an hour to talk to public school students to learn the Holocaust. So I'm taking notes right now about what I should be saying in there. So I already have my intro. Keep going.
Yeah. So look, there was certainly pagan anti-Semitism before Christianity. Let's be very clear, it has existed, it well predated Christianity, but I think what happened is that Christianity theologized it in that, early, keep in mind, the New Testament was a dispute between two groups of Jews. Everyone's a Jew. But then when the two traditions part ways, early Christianity is trying to distinguish itself, trying to convince people to not keep practicing Judaism and to really make a clean break. And it very much defined itself against Judaism. There's a Latin name for this, the Adversus Judaeos tradition. And, you have this many, many centuries of Christian writing about Judaism that is three main themes. Number one, Jews are superhumanly, supernaturally powerful, so powerful and threatening. Number two, they are diabolically depraved. They are perverse and disgusting and very dangerous. And number three, they're in a conspiracy to harm you. So power, depravity, conspiracy. You see these three themes really wind their way through Europe, and you can kind of trace them all the way to the Holocaust and to today. And again, I'm just focusing on Europe. Many Jews do not have roots in Europe. Right. Feels a little Ashken normative, which I don't love.
You covered everything, but you can't cover everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, but when you're looking at American Jews, the majority of American Jews do have roots in Europe, which is why I focused on that. And so anti-Semitism is not a mystery. When you learn Holocaust anti-Semitism, you kind of think it's kind of a mystery why they chose the Jews. It must be some eternal mystical thing, always in the order of the universe. Or you might think maybe the Jews did something to deserve it. If so many people have hated them, maybe least mysterious phenomena ever. You can trace it back through 2,000 years, as these brilliant Christian scholars have done. So I think today we are still dealing with these three themes of power, depravity, and conspiracy. You can find them on college campuses. You can find them on the American right, on the American left. It's the same three themes everywhere.
Beautiful. Okay. And then say a little bit, we're in America, just say a little bit of you have a take on these a little bit. I guess that you're trying to do history. I guess the Christian piece is kind of the idea that we were told to show how Judaism is wrong, but not necessarily kill Jews, because we need to keep Jews around to prove that Christianity is right.
Correct.
Right?
The Augustine, yeah.
Right. And then you have the Western European piece, which the big moment of that is, I guess, emancipation, which you alluded to a little bit as well. Yeah. This idea that all of a sudden we have to figure out on both sides, what is a Jew? Is a Jew a human or a Jew? Are they a Frenchman or Jewish, that kind of thing? And then the Jewish community has to do their own self-reckoning. How are we going to fit in? And as you alluded to, some people say, let's look as much like them as possible, and some say, let's dig our heels in as much as possible.
Exactly.
And try to find a way. And now talk to me a little bit about America. What happened there?
Yeah, so there you kind of see these themes work their way into America. American Jews came, and this was such a welcoming place for Jews, really unlike any other country on earth except for Israel. This was just, Jews were deemed citizens back in 1791. You've got the president, George Washington, writing a letter to a synagogue. This is pretty extraordinary. And of course, there's been plenty of anti-Semitism, let's be clear. I don't want to whitewash this at all. But, in the way that anti-Semitism was really Europe's original sin, I think that racism was really more Americans' original sin. I think that there were just so many, I think Jonathan Sarna, the historian, beautifully writes that there were just so many other hated others in America. Mm-hmm. You had so many other people who were hated that Jews were just kind of one of many hated others. Right. And look, America, especially the past 80 years, we were doing pretty well, right? You had largely prosperity, mm-hmm. liberalism was thriving. Mm-hmm. This is a kind of, Jews thrive in liberal democracy. And I think today, as we're seeing liberal democracy really being undermined, shockingly, anti-Semitism is coming back. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Okay, and then I want to play through a little bit of that. I want to ask a few questions, actually. One is, you focus a lot on the way, and we'll get to it a little bit more, but I want to ask it now. The pressure from the countries around us has affected the way we be Jewish.
Yes.
First, let's unpack that, and then I'll ask my next question. So you use the phrase Hanukkah anti-Semitism and Purim anti-Semitism.
This is Dara Horn.
Which is Dara Horn. I think Esther Klein-Levy also has some language like that also. But so just lay that out for us a little bit.
So I think there's a few things that are key to understand anti-Semitism. As Dara Horn beautifully puts it in People Love Dead Jews, there's the kind of anti-Semitism that's eliminationist, which is the Jews are bad, nothing they could do to be good, we must kill them. That's the Holocaust and pogroms. But there's also a kind of anti-Semitism that says, no, the Jews are bad, of course, but there is something they can do to be saved. And that is they can reject whatever it is that we, the majority, think is disgusting about Jewish civilization. So centuries ago, it was reject Jewish religion, convert to Christianity, and you'll be saved. Maybe. Wasn't foolproof, didn't always work, but you could maybe be saved. In my parents' and grandparents' generation, it was Jews are kind of gross, but reject your last name. Reject your nose, get some surgery, mm-hmm. stop being so Jewy, whatever mm-hmm. that means. Be more waspy, be more classy, whatever that means. And then maybe you can join my country club and my law firm. Today, the rejection demand, the conversion demand is reject your Zionism. Reject your connection to your ancestral homeland, and then you'll be saved. Mm-hmm. If you're an anti-Zionist Jew, then you're okay, then you're saved, then we'll allow you to be. And you kind of see this sometimes on college campuses where there's almost this Christian conversion narrative you see some Jewish kids going through, where they're growing up, my rabbi, my parents said Israel's awesome, but I got to campus and then everyone told me that no, it's racist and genocidal, mm-hmm. and I had an epiphany. I saw the light and I took anti-racism and anti-colonialism into my heart, and now I'm saved. Yeah. And their classmates are now you're saved. Mm-hmm. And if you do the thing that the majority demands of you, then you can be a good Jew. Then you're okay, but it never really lasts. Right? Unfortunately, oftentimes that conversionist anti-Semitism, it kind of turns into eliminationist anti-Semitism, and the Jews end up kind of meeting the same fate regardless.
Right, and I want to pull those out, and I think there's a third piece which you add here. So the first is this idea of elimination. The second is this idea of kind of pressure to fit in as a Jew, and then the third is a little bit more subtle that you point out, which is this idea of, in addition to those two, it doesn't feel like anti-Semitism, but sometimes in the water of where we are, you call it Christian hegemony, I think is the language you use. Sometimes it's just it's where we're floating. One of the examples that really stuck with me was just talking about the fact that Christmas and Hanukkah are pitted against each other. Right? This idea that you have Christmas music, we have Hanukkah music, but really we have high holiday music.
Yeah,
right? This is,
exactly.
We have these beautiful songs for Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur, and those should be playing all September or whatever it is on our radio. And instead it's we have Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song as our way to keep up with Christians. And it's wait, we were just backed into a corner there. That's what happened here. And it's all around us. There's lots of moments where we don't realize that.
And that I actually have a footnote in one of my chapters where I say imagine if Jews were the vast majority of Americans and Christians were a tiny minority, and if we were every fall we were hey, you guys can whatever holidays you celebrate in September, you guys can put your stuff up. We're yeah, we have our big shofar statue and our our beautiful Yom Kippur description in the public library in the public square, but if you guys, whatever holidays you do, we'll put your thing next to it. It's but we don't have holidays, and so, okay. It's sort of it becomes absurd, but that's,
Beautiful. Yeah. So, and I think that's such a big piece of it, and I think that's a really important piece that really stands, all three pieces stand out, but that's a piece that people should really sit with a little bit, which is noticing that. And one of the languages you use, which I want you to open up a little bit about here, is what you call Jewish keys, right? This idea that even the main, you mentioned spirituality before, but there's certain words we use that we think are the core of religion because that's what Christianity made the core.
Right.
And actually Judaism has their own. And I'll add a third piece, which is, you've mentioned Shai Held before. Some of those times they've taken words that we feel like, oh, well, love is not a Jewish thing anymore. That's your thing.
Right.
But it's like, no, love was a Jewish thing. But talk to me about some of the keys you discovered.
I mean, as Shai points out, he's like, Jesus was actually quoting the Torah, because as a Jew, he actually knew the Torah. But it's fine, don't worry about it. No, there's a number, I realized that I had a number of keys which I was trying to use to unlock Judaism, and I thought they were universal keys. I thought they were master keys, but they weren't. They were really keys to unlock Christianity. And frankly, they were so oversimplified, they weren't even keys to really unlock a deep, rich Christianity. I mean, I actually feel I sort of feel badly for Christians because the pop culture discourse around Christianity isn't even really a respectful, deep, sophisticated discourse for Christians. And my Christian friends are like, what is this nonsense? This is not what we do. So it's really not fair to them either. But a good example of a key is I actually, when I was doing chaplaincy on a chaplaincy shift one day, I had a lovely Christian patient who had forgotten her Bible, and she really wanted to read it. So I brought her one, and I came back later, and she was just so absorbed in its pages, and she was like, it brings me so much comfort and peace. I feel really soothed. And I thought oh, that's how I used to think you would read the Torah. You just sit down, you open it up, and you'll be comforted and soothed, and it'll teach you to believe in God. And don't read to just sit and read the Torah. That's not how we do it, right? That's not how Jews do it. And I thought oh, that's an interesting key. Right? The very idea that it's all about faith, and how's your faith, and faith, and we're really focused on our faith. And of course, that's central in Judaism. I don't mean to diminish it, but you can also be a really committed, passionate Jew without a faith in God. Believe it or not, there are many Jews who are. I know I get pushback on this, but you can. And there's an idea in Judaism that the only real, authentic form of Jewish spiritual practice is scripted communal prayers in a synagogue, because that's what Christians have. That's spiritual practice. In Jewish tradition, study is a central form of spiritual practice, right? Studying our texts and trying to discern the voice of the divine throughout history and in the voices of our ancestors, that is a spiritual practice. But again, Christianity doesn't really have that parallel, so we kind of lost that. And so I think again and again, I kept seeing these keys of obedience. That's a lovely idea, but that's not. Again, these are just words. Even the word religion, that doesn't fit what Jews are. We're not just a religion. You and I could decide to reject every aspect of Jewish religion. We're still Jews. Nor are we a race or an ethnicity. Jews are of many races and ethnicities. We are a peoplehood, a family, a civilization, a tribe, a nation. I don't know what word we are, but we're not just a religion. Again, we're describing ourselves using these Christian terms and categories, and they just don't fit.
Beautiful. And I think you do go in the book as far as saying that we're not a bloodline, we're a
text line. This is Amos Oz and Fania Salzberger in their book Jews and Words. They say ours is not a bloodline, but a text line. And I just love that. Our texts are our shared DNA, right? They are what we can always return to, regardless of how we practice, who we are. And the fact that so many Jews, like me 10 years ago, don't even know they exist is the fundamental problem we're dealing with today, I think.
Beautiful. So, bring us in a little bit. You mentioned keys like Brit, Mitzvot, Torah's polemic, Kadosh, Nasev, and Ishma are some of the ones you say. And you also went on this journey where you went into, Torah as opposed to the Torah.
Right.
And so, tell me some of the keys, and also tell me, when you went back and said, there's rabbinic discourse, I want to get involved here. What are the keys you discovered, and what did you discover about the nature of rabbinic discourse?
Right.
Which are two questions, but you
right. No, I mean, this is for most of my life, I could tell you exactly what Catholicism said about reproductive rights and abortion. I could tell you exactly what the Democratic and Republican Party has said about crime, immigration, economic justice. I could tell you what every TED Talk guru and what every self-help book said about how to live a good life. This is what is in Judaism. And actually, a lot of the wisdom we have is a lot deeper, but I didn't even know that Judaism said anything about these things. So when I actually started studying Jewish law, I mean, number one, I love Shai Held's book, Judaism is About Love. I discovered that the old slander that Judaism is a religion of law, it's legalistic and weedy and nitpicky, while Christianity is a religion of love, that is such an anti-Semitic lie. If you actually study Jewish law, you see that that weediness, that specificity, it is articulating a very high bar for love and teaching you how to meet it. And the specific examples I'll give are, we're told that if you go into a store and you have no intention of buying anything, don't ask the shopkeeper the price of an item, because to do so, it wastes their time and it gets their hopes up. It's actually unfair to them. We're also told that if you loan someone money who's really struggling, and a few weeks later you see them coming down the street towards you, and you know they still can't pay you back, you should actually try to avoid running into them because you don't want to embarrass them. And you can mock that and say, like, really? So you need that specific scenario? Judaism's filled with that. It's okay, this specific person has this specific thing, but what if they have that thing? But what if that thing happens? But what if that? It's rabbis, endless, weedy, nitpicky. What they're doing is they're trying to inculcate a certain kind of moral vision. They're trying to get you to hone in more and more finely on this person before you. It's like when you go to the eye doctor and you click that vision machine and your vision gets crisper and crisper. That's what they're doing with moral vision. And it's like so countercultural to the kind of moral thinking we have today. It's not even really moral thinking. I would say the kind of thinking we have today, which says, like, no, divide people up into two crude and dehumanizing categories. Powerful, powerless, oppressor, oppressed. And you love and hate them accordingly. End of story. And that's really clicking that vision machine backwards and making everything so blurry that all you can see are these two big blobs. And so I like that kind of key, right? That kind of moral vision, that idea of weediness as really a kind of really deep moral training, that is a Jewish key that I discovered. And I thought, like, this is a much higher form of morality than this pretty nasty secular ethic that is leading people to really dehumanize each other.
Wow. Everything you said there, beautiful. It's just, and I love the metaphor also of the eye doctor.
The eye doctor
totally
is
fits.
so
right. Well, we also live in a culture that sounds like don't sweat the small stuff, and you're like, well, why are they so focused on like the order, like who gets up first from the table, like all these like little things, and it's like
it matters, right? There is a moral. I mean, it's so funny. I actually remember Rabbi Jay Michelson. He has this like lovely little bit of Torah in one of his books, and he says, is it stupid that I don't eat bacon? He said, yes, but you do stupid things for people you love. You do stupid things for those you love. And I thought a lot, I've been thinking a lot about that, where it's like, love is in the specifics, right? You don't just go around proclaiming big feelings for your spouse. I love you, I love you. You go to 4 stores to find the particular brand of chocolate they like because they've had a bad day, right? That kind of specificity. And is that stupid? Is it stupid that your wife is obsessed with that one brand of chocolate? Maybe it is, but like, it's not the point, right? That specificity of love, that very, I see it a lot in my chaplaincy patients where it's just like the very specific things that they do for each other, that families do for each other. It's this weedy form of love that's actually quite a high bar for love. So we should sweat the small things, actually.
Beautiful. And there is, I think, Rabbi Soloveitchik really was famous for this as well. There is like a sense of, if you actually go deeper, there's such deep meaning between the choices, right? So there's the layer you're referring to also, there's like the search for truth, which I think is so rare today, is the sense of like rabbis are saying, let's argue, let's preserve both opinions, and let's recognize that we are searching for truth, and we're going to respect and quote each other and all those kinds of things. You mentioned that Hillel usually wins because Hillel always quotes the opposite side, Shammai, those schools of thought. But then, so there's the search for truth, which I think is super rare, and I always used to say that, like, I remember having this thought in college that there's all these forces around me telling me how to think about dating, job, marriage, all those things, and certainly Judaism should be one of the board members in my mind when I'm consulting, and probably should be the chair of the board, right? Like they really have like wisdom there, but so there's that piece, but there's also this layer I'm alluding to with Rabbi Soloveitchik, where it's like, actually, if you spend time, there's deep meaning behind these things, there's values.
Absolutely.
Like an example I think of is, we have the tradition, let's say you go to someone's house for a Shabbat meal. So usually the host of the house will say kind of the benediction over the meal. So they'll say, Kiddush, I don't know how you say the Kiddush in English, the sanctification of the wine.
Holiness. I don't know.
Christian hegemony right
so
there.
It doesn't translate well,
Christian
right?
Way to say this
it's like separation. It's separating out. Like it's so, I can't, it's so confusing.
So the person who's leading the meal does those, the host usually, Kiddush and Motzi, and then the custom is for one of the guests to lead what's called, I call benching, grace after meals. Also, again, we're trying to fit into Christian language. We can't avoid it.
I know.
But even if you look at that carefully for a second, if you imagine, right, what it was like for our ancestors to, be like Abraham and invite people into their tent and call them and say, I need to sanctify this moment. I want you to tell this is not about me being rich and having goats to feed you. This is about me saying, this is all about God, and I want you to feel that.
Yes.
And then also, if you can imagine what customs should be like. When you show up at someone's house, right, they shouldn't kick you out, ever. They should never tell you to leave. They should make you feel as welcome forever. And so it is on the guest to say, we literally say, Rabotai nevarech, like, gentlemen, or people of the room, let us bless. So you imagine this image back then of someone coming into a room and saying, it's time for us to go. Let us bless.
Exactly.
I actually respect that you said this is about God, so I'm going to bless on the way out, but it's going to be my job to get up and move, right, and to leave the room. And so you have like all these little details that feel like they're details, but if you actually take the time not only to recognize that like they've come to the conclusions by actually having respect for each other, and they preserve both sides, but also under each conclusion there's deep meaning about how to treat your guest and how to host your guest, and also how to leave when someone hosts you.
Yes.
Right? I see it all the time. I'll see like a very holy rabbi, for lack of again, using terrible Christian terms.
It's okay.
Who, like if we're like at a cocktail party, or the equivalent, let's say a kiddush, probably not a cocktail party, will not leave the person they're talking to. Right? Because they'll just be like, I'm greeting you with a smile. I'm going to be so present with you until you leave this space. And then people are like, they're like used to social norms in like the workspace where it's like, say hi and move on, say hi and move on. Like, no, this person is doing a practice right now. They're seeing me. And like, they almost think it's weird. It's like, no, that's weird. What this person's doing is right, but you don't know because you're not in it.
That's, I remember I had some interaction with a wonderful Jewish chaplain, and he said, when he's done with his patients, he always walks away backwards. And he's like, it's like when I'm at the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and there's a tradition that you don't turn your back on the wall, you actually walk away backwards. And he said, if I'm doing that for the Kotel, so much more so for this human being who's in the image of God, like I'm going to back away from them. And I remember, I will never forget that. I thought that was so profoundly moving.
Amazing. So you mentioned chaplaincy. I want to ask, one of the things you talk about is the beautiful things you discovered in Judaism. One of the languages I love that you use is this idea of going toward thin places.
Yes.
Just say a little bit about that.
So, we live in a secular society that says that death, grief, aging, illness, those things are disgusting. They're just revolting. Like, please just run as far as possible from them. Like, inject them with chemicals, Botox, send flowers, send a text, just run away. Hospitals are creepy, funeral homes are creepy, dead bodies, no thank you. Judaism says the exact opposite. It says, no, you run right up to those people in those spaces because those are what are known, and this is not Jewish, this is not Judaism saying this is me saying this, those are what are known as thin places, which is, these are sort of places where the boundaries between life and death and heaven and earth really thin out. And they are very disorienting spaces, right? When you're really ill, when you are mourning the loss of someone you love very much, when you are, trying to prepare someone for burial, like these are disorienting spaces. And what Jewish tradition says is you need to be accompanied in those spaces. You need to be held and loved by your community in those spaces. And I just find that to be so countercultural and so profound. I mean, I just studying all of the laws around tahara, which is the practice of preparing a dead body for burial. It is unbelievably beautiful where, the community members who are preparing this body, they say a prayer of forgiveness before they start their work to say, to sort of ask for forgiveness in case they embarrass the person, they don't pass a tool over the person, they walk around them. Like there is this way that they're birthing this person into death in love in the way they were birthed into life in love. Like it is such a, and just to think about someone you loved, leaving the world that way. And again, it's in the details, right? That prayer, those practices of like, we are gonna treat this human being with such respect. I just find it to be so profound and again, so countercultural.
Beautiful. And so let's play with counterculture for a little bit there, because I think that's a big piece of your work. You basically, I love that you use like modern language. You're like the Torah is trolling the communities that it's facing at the time, right? This idea of kadosh is the idea of being separate from people, and Abraham is the ivri. He's set apart. Like, talk me through a little bit around this like theme that you're seeing goes through all of Judaism, around what it means to be separate and opposite of something, countercultural.
This is exactly. I mean, Judaism from its beginning has been a polemic against the surrounding societies. I mean, you come in and the Torah is basically saying to these Israelites, God is basically saying to these Israelites, create a society that is the exact opposite of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, these are societies that worshipped power, wealth, might. They worshipped emperors, pharaohs, kings. And, the Torah is saying, no. You get preoccupied with the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor. That's where your orbit of concern should be directed. You do not worship power, you worship goodness. I mean, it's an entirely different way of orienting yourself in the world. So many of the laws in the Torah, if you look at them, they're basically like, they're almost attacks on the surrounding societies. It's like, see them, do the opposite, distinguish yourself from them. And this idea of monotheism, this idea that every human being is created in God's image, which Ravia Greenberg has so beautifully written and spoken about, is a revolutionary idea, which, by the way, underlies notions of democracy, human rights, liberalism. Like, this is the core idea of the Western world that Judaism introduced. And I think again and again, when I study Jewish tradition, I am struck by how radically countercultural it is. I mean, even just like the basic way of Jewish thinking, which is to think in polarities, meaning you have to hold totally opposing truths and reckon with them and wrestle with them, which is so different from how we engage today. Like, the Torah tells us no fewer than 36 times, love the stranger, care for the stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. That stranger, that non-Israelite, you need to care for them. It also tells us, remember Amalek. The Amalekites were a tribe that attacked the ancient Israelites from behind, which is where like the weakest members of the tribe were. It's a real sense of like horror at someone who would do that. And it's saying, oh, you never forget them. Like you never forget that. So we're being told, be open-hearted, be compassionate, love those who are not of the tribe, but also be wary. Be wary of people outside the tribe who might want to kill you. So you're kind of being told, like, keep compassion, but don't be naive. And you've got to hold both of those. And I think, you know, the modern social media ethic is like, no, you cling to one pole and you just say that anyone who believes the other pole is on the wrong side of history, is bad, evil. That's not Jewish thinking. And I see Jews doing this, frankly, clinging to their one pole and just ignoring the other pole. And that is, it's not Jewish. It's just not Jewish. I'm sorry, there's nothing Jewish about that. You have to wrestle with both. I mean, again and again, it's like the bride on the wedding night. We're told, like, you know, you're supposed to praise the bride, but what if you don't think she's praiseworthy? What if you don't think she's attractive? Well, you've got to, you know, you don't want to lie, you have to balance honesty, but you don't want to be unkind. You have to be kind. So honesty, kindness, you got to hold them both. And I think so often today we're told, no, cling to your pole and just dismiss everything else. And that is a really dangerous way of thinking that leads to extremism.
Beautiful. All right, so I want to play with that a little bit further, because you mentioned something that, you know, there's a lot of ink has been spent by people like Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, Rabbi Ari Lamb, who have really made the case that, like, Western liberal democracy was built on Jewish values, right? That, like, we really, you know, we sparked all these things that are happening there, and then at the same time we have this idea about being countercultural, right?
Yes.
And so you have a sense that, so they're saying, look around you, the water is Jewish.
Yeah.
And you're saying, look around you, the water is Christian.
I'm actually saying both.
Right, for sure.
Right,
I just want to play with that for a little bit to become aware of that.
We both have shaped and opposed Western culture. It's the most fascinating thing, right? Like, we've shaped it. So many Jewish ideas underlie it, but then there are these countercultural ideas that fight against it. I mean, even, you know, it's funny, you think about the way we balance the universal and the particular. Jewish tradition says, and Rabbi Sachs writes beautifully about this, Jewish tradition says every single human being is created in God's image. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah, they were not Jews, right? But they are like beloved to God, equal to everyone else. And God has a particular relationship with Abraham and his descendants, as does God have particular relationships with other peoples, right? Judaism contemplates that. Other traditions do not. It's like there is one right way to be saved. And if you don't do that right way, that's kind of a problem, right? That's kind of a problem. And Judaism does not say that, right? That universal versus particular, we actually hold both of them. So that's kind of like the universal is what underlies democracy, human rights, all of that. But the polemic is the particular. The polemic is that, and we're going to be a little different, and we're going to have a different approach in many ways. It's a brilliant balance, I think, between those two things.
Right, trying to strike that. Okay, so then, so let's talk a little bit then around, like, and you, by the way, you bring a beautiful quote from the Netziv that I just have to, like, just pull up, this idea that, you know, from Parshat Balak, the idea that, like, you know, they have this language that there's a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations, right? And you want to say it yourself? Are you comfortable? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, go ahead.
Right, this idea that if we dwell apart, right? If we do that job of dwelling apart in some way, that allows us to dwell peacefully. And if we try to become reckoned among the nations, if we're trying too hard to be part of the nations, we're trying too hard to be cool, to use that language, to fit in with the Jews, that we lose what it's about.
That's exactly it. Right. And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that, you know, we think of the past 80 years as a golden era for Jews in America, and it was. I mean, I think it was a really wonderful era. It was an era in which I think Jews were very comfortable, and I think we became really focused on making Jews as comfortable as possible. And I want Jews to be comfortable, just as I want people of all minority backgrounds to feel comfortable in America. I want them to feel like they fit and they can you know, be part of the modern society. But I almost wonder if we got too enamored with comfort, right? If we almost got too comfortable and we forgot about the importance of our difference, like forgot about the polemic part of our purpose. And I have to say, I remember maybe a year or two ago reading about some case where it was one of these cases where I think it was like a football team, and the football coach insisted on everyone praying Christian prayers, and a Jewish kid was like, this is not okay, and so they brought a case, and they actually lost. They said, no, it's fine for them to pray these Christian prayers, and my response was, good. And I thought oh my, why would I say that's horrible? I don't want that kid to feel left out. That's terrible. And I don't want the Muslim kid or the Hindu kid to feel left out either. Of course that's not good. But I think, so no, I disagree with the finding of that case, but there was almost something I'm almost a little bit glad that kid was made to feel different, was reminded that he is different. Because I think it's been very easy in America to just not feel different, to kind of blend in. And I think there is something about, if we're not gonna claim our difference, now we're kind of being forced to claim it. We're almost being reminded, wait a second. And, there are two directions you can go. You can go in the, I'm gonna become an anti-Semite and be obsessively fighting this and talking about this, and they're bad. But there are 16 million of us. We're the size of a city in China. We're not gonna end anti-Semitism. We've never been able to. There are billions of people who aren't really fond of us. So you can go in another direction which says, yeah, I am different. Darn right I am. I am a Jew, I am proud. Here is what my difference offers. Here is the radical countercultural wisdom that my tradition has, and happy to share it with you, and I hope you'll share yours with me. I think that's the direction that I hope we go.
Right, and I hear you saying kind of two different things. One is, and Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who's been on JBS several times, kind of had this language a few years ago of, we've spent centuries helping American Jews become more American,
yes,
and now we need to help American Jews become more Jewish.
Right on.
Which was I feel right on.
Right on.
And I think I hear you saying there's two elements of that. One is being able to zoom out of current culture and say, whoa, right, civic discourse has gone off the rails. Whoa,
correct,
our focus on youth and disrespecting the elder has gone off the rails. How can I come back and say we have something different to say other than parroting what everyone else is saying?
Correct.
And then the second one is also lean into Judaism, because you can't even have those opinions about counterculture until you actually explore our tradition.
That's the problem. I think I think about how I was rejecting something I didn't even know existed. Right? I was rejecting this kind of uninspiring Judaism in my childhood, but that wasn't Judaism. Right? There was so much more to this tradition, and here's the thing, I want Jews to know it. And look, what they choose to do with it is not my business. I'm not here to tell anyone how to practice or be Jewish, but I am here to say, actually, there's just one Jewish identity that's not okay, and that is the contentless Jewish identity. Knowing nothing, that's the one kind of Judaism I will say, actually, I'm gonna put my foot down and say that's not okay. Any other kind of Judaism, if you know the basics of the tradition, have a sense, what you do with it, I'm not here to judge. But, to at least know what you are accepting, rejecting, I think that is quite important.
Beautiful. All right, so I want to, I was blown away by this book. I think it literally is a must read. People need to read this book on all sides of the aisle. It's so important. I want to push you as an individual a little bit further and just hear your thoughts. So I think a big theme of this is the sense that, we're in so much water that we don't even realize. And I want to, Rav Salanter, in the Musar world, talks about improving yourself, how you need checks and balances to make sure that you think you're doing the right thing, but unless you have, in his words, a Musar Vod, a group of people to discuss it with, how do you get through there? So I'll just throw out examples. You don't have to respond to them individually, but I want you to just talk through how you have checks and balances. So one could argue, the example I often give is that at some point in the future, more people will think the Holocaust didn't happen than did happen, right? And Jewish tradition will say, you don't understand. This was a communal event. We were all there. This actually happened. My grandfather lost his siblings and parents, all four of my grandparents, my wife's grandparents, all those people, right? But there will be a time where maybe even many Jews will think the Holocaust was a myth that was as part of our Jewish myth.
God forbid,
I'm taking it further, and this is going to push the question further.
Traumatizing.
And you might feel uncomfortable with this sentiment, but I feel the same way about the Torah at Mount Sinai. Right? I feel that was also a massive communal event that for many generations drove the Jewish people. And now, with the combination of history and Western democracy and all these kinds of things, we got to the point where to even say in a let's call it a liberal setting, that we think there was a moment that God gave something happened on a mountain with the Jewish people feels totally insane. So I wonder, how much is it just the water still is carrying us? Even the deeper we go into Judaism, there's still, I went to Penn and Harvard, you went to Harvard and Harvard. We've been around people who are the whole God thing is crazy. We have the Holocaust, this is a second question, I'll just lay them out, right? It's impossible to believe in a God when the Holocaust happened, because God certainly isn't like, the Jews messed up, I'm going to make a Holocaust. That seems crazy.
Right.
So the idea of God being involved intimately in our lives, you stubbed your toe because you were disrespecting your parents, that can't possibly be true, because look at the Holocaust, right? So those kinds of things where it's like academia has said to us, but if you look at the Torah, we have portions that say, if you mess up, things like October 7th will happen, right? And if you behave, you will be back into the land. It's like over and over. So there are these things that kind of like, the water is so strong, and then I'll go even crazier and I'll talk about Israel, right? So I think we're totally on the same page, that people that are like backed into the corner of like, I hate Israel, I'm anti-Zionist, like I'm kosher now. But one could also argue that we live in a world that like is forcing us to say like, I'm critical of Israel. Maybe I don't hate Israel, but I'm critical of Israel, so now you should accept me. Or like, and it makes me think of, and I know I'm putting a lot on you, but I'll let you flow afterwards.
Please.
It makes me think of, I remember, your first employer, Al Gore. So when he was not elected and George W. Bush became the president, there was this like thing in America that was like, if you're traveling abroad, put a Canadian flag on your backpack, because everyone hates America right now, right? Can you imagine back then compared to now? History repeats itself. It's crazy.
So quaint.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, pretend you're Canadian, right? It was this idea of like, it was well beyond like putting pressure to be critical of the government. It was basically saying you had to say, like, George W. Bush, according to most, was democratically elected. We had our hanging chads or whatever. And like what it means to be like, I'm an American, there's an Israel over there. They democratically, like it feels like the same question of your book, which is like, Israel's been backed into a corner. So they've elected a right-wing government. And now for American Jews to be mad at the right-wing government, instead of mad at the people that attacked Israel and led them to elect a right-wing government. So I feel like, the divinity of Torah, how we think about Israel, how we think about God and punishment, all feel like opportunities where, let's call it like, a lot of liberal Jews kind of, even if they get as far as you've gone, might still be swimming in the water a little bit and not realize.
So, okay. That's a lot, Justin.
Yeah, please. Just, and one,
I'll just in 2 minutes. I think the Holocaust and Mount Sinai are two different things. The Holocaust is a historical event that absolutely happened, and to say that it didn't, that's a lie, and it's an anti-Semitic lie, period. That one strikes me as easier.
But give it 2,000 years. Give it 4,000.
And look, I worry that you're right. Like, I actually worry that you're right, that this will happen. Mount Sinai, like, I'm one of the Jews who doesn't actually believe that literally happened, but I also don't believe there was literally a boy who literally cried wolf, but that story is true. Like, I don't have to be able to locate the boy in history and know his name and know where he was born. It doesn't matter. It's true. So I think that there doesn't have to be historical or scientific truth in the Torah to have moral and sacred truth. I also think we make the Torah holy and sacred by sanctifying it, by the thousands of years we have spent living by it, studying it. That gives it its sanctity as well. So whether or not there was a God on Mount Sinai, I almost think that's irrelevant. And I know many Jews disagree very strongly with me and have a huge problem with that, and that's okay, right? We can have a different way to approach that. That's no problem. But you're right, like, it's hard to know what waters you're swimming in. I think a lot of young people on campus are very, very confused about Israel because the waters they are swimming in are so extreme. Like, they've moved that Overton window so far to the extreme in the anti-Israel direction that you can't even think clearly. If you're on a campus that puts Israel in the same bucket as the Nazi Party or the KKK, then you get into a situation where it's like, oh, Justin, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a liberal Nazi. Or like, I'm in the KKK, but I'm not racist. It's like, what are you talking about? And this is why I see these Jewish kids being like, yeah, I'm a Zionist, but like, I don't agree with everything. That doesn't mean I agree with everything. It's like a Chinese student who's like, yeah, a Chinese American student who's like, yeah, I actually really love China. I feel very connected to China. None of their classmates are gonna assume they agree with every policy and every leader in China. Jewish kids aren't afforded the same basic respect and courtesy. And so I worry that the water there is so poisoned and toxic. And, it's like, how do you know you're in poisoned and toxic water? You often don't. The fish doesn't really want to opine about water.
And I think that's a little bit of my question also, because we obviously could debate the divinity of the Torah, but I think,
forever.
But also, like, how do you know when, like, how do you know the balance between what's the water and what's you? Because one could make the argument that going through liberal schooling would make it almost impossible for someone to imagine that Mount Sinai happened.
For me, how I do it is like, I really try to look at a bunch of different viewpoints. Someone remarked to me that the list of rabbis who I acknowledge in my acknowledgement section in my first book, they're like, those people have never been on the same page anywhere or in the same room. Like, these are very people with wildly diverse perspectives. And I think in order to have any clarity about the water you're in, you have to really engage with people who are in very different water.
Beautiful.
And sometimes I was like, no, I think this person's way off. But sometimes I was like, well, that's interesting. I think that's how you break out, and that is the Jewish way, right? This is the school of Hillel back in the day studied Shammai. They studied the school. These were ancient sages, scholars, rabbis who studied people whose views were very different. Beautiful. They studied them first. They were sort of saying, like, what's the water like over there? Okay, now I'm going to look at my own water. Mm-hmm. And I think the danger of these social media echo chambers and filter bubbles we're in is that we're just in our own water all day long being told how great the water is here. Mm-hmm. And it might not be great. Mm-hmm. So I think the way you do it is you break yourself out of your bubbles.
Beautiful. And I think that's such an important piece. We have that problem with politics where it's like you need to read others. But I think I want to add that layer on, which is such an important piece, which is, let's pull away what anti-Semitism is imposing on us and the water and all those pieces. But you're also saying within Judaism, right?
Yes.
Go on this journey. Be exposed to the people who believe in Mount Sinai.
Absolutely.
And be exposed to the people who don't believe in Mount Sinai. And I think, by the way, we try to do this here. We'll have someone make the case for God for 1 hour on JBS and the next hour make the case totally against God.
Right.
And I think that reminder also that there's it's weird because it's so hard to imagine. There's so much out there. And then you look at Judaism and you're like, wait, the slivers of light between these different groups and they don't agree with each other, which is on one hand is a bad thing, but also it shows that there's so much richness and ability to go in and to discover and to have the opportunity. I try to do this with the show, to have, you on this week around Rosh HaShanah, and next week is Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon, the head of Gush, the chief rabbi of Gush, who has, I imagine a fairly
probably
different
disagree
theology.
on some things, right?
But back to back, and to actually try to draw out the best of each of them and say, what do they bring to the table, and then let the viewer or audience decide for themselves. I often say to my kids, the trick to life is learning from everyone around you and deciding what to copy and what not to copy.
100%.
And I feel like that's the core of your book in some ways.
And being willing to change.
Yeah.
I look at myself 10 years ago, I don't even, it's sort of funny now, I don't know how waking up in the morning if someone told me you're not Jewish, I literally don't know how I'd function. I don't know what I would do. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, I would probably been like, okay, I can figure that out. Yeah. It's I'm so different because I was willing to be changed. I was willing to be shown that I was wrong, to be shown that some of my thinking was really shallow and selfish and narcissistic, and there was a better way to think about how to be human. So I appreciate that.
Beautiful. I think that's a perfect message for us to close on as we approach the high holidays and we think about the idea of teshuvah, this idea of, recognizing the klipot we said at the beginning. Yes. What are the things that are just blocking you from seeing the Jewish mission, what you are as a Jew, the power of Judaism, right? And this other piece that you're saying, which is, and once you enter into the beautiful room of Judaism, really trying to look in different places and recognizing that, what do you copy, what don't you copy, and also, we all have the ability to change, and please God, we should all have a happy and sweet new year. Yes. We should soon we'll see our new neshamas, our new souls will come out as we brush everything off. And I hope that as people do that book, certainly if they haven't read the first book, Get Here All Along, you got to pick that up for sure. And then what I think is going to probably be the book of this year as a Jew, as your guides as you go through this high holiday experience and as you prepare for the year ahead. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justin.